Before everybody leaves, I would like to introduce the last panel of today. It's probably the most important panel. I'm not sure why it's the latest one. Well, the thing that the last is not the least definitely applies to us, because we're going to be talking about the ecosystem. And, oh, thanks, yeah. And you can be Mark Zuckerberg in Lithuania, and you're not going to be able to raise capital if there's no ecosystem, right? So the reason why all of you guys are here is to learn more about the ecosystem from those top professionals that we brought from Norway, Poland, Estonia, and Israel, and myself from United States. I'm a trader, investor, and serial entrepreneur from New York, and I came here as part of VC startups to hold this panel. So, if you are, why you're here is if you are a startup founder or you would like to start a startup, then this is definitely for you because you guys get to learn the insights about what's necessary for that. If you guys are an investor trying to see the necessary landscapes and the necessary countries where you can possibly invest your capital, this presentation is definitely for you. If you are a government official trying to see if you can expand your landscape in your country further, this is definitely for you because we got some government professionals in regards to the startups. So, good enough? Yeah? Guys, good enough? Yes? No? Any engagement? Oh, and also there's one more thing. We're not going to be technical today. We're actually going to be interesting. We're not going to be boring. We'll try to keep this thing as engaging as possible. So, how to use this guy? Right, this, right? All right, so today, we are going to present you 4 speakers of the panel about the ecosystem. And the first person is Hans Johnson. He's the CEO of Numbercom. Your round of applause, guys.
Thank you.
So can you please talk about yourself and talk more about the ecosystem?
Sure thing. I'm Norwegian. I represent Numbercom. We're a startup in Oslo in Norway, and we do our development here in Lithuania, your beautiful country, in Kaunas actually. And we've decided to come to Lithuania and do development here because we see certain advantages with doing just that. And me being an entrepreneur, I want to talk about sort of that kind of angle, looking at it as an entrepreneur. Because there will be a lot of people in the world saying that what Lithuania needs to do is to become extremely competitive, like Silicon Valley or Singapore or Israel or other examples of great startup economies and startup ecosystems. But I say that Lithuania needs to play on the Lithuanian strengths. You need to find what you are strong at and play that as much as you can. And what you're strong at is really what you need to discover, but I'll pitch in my angle and what we've seen in Lithuania and what we see as a potential strength. And it might not be what you think, because we see that this proud country, this beautiful country, and you fought so hard for your independence, it's an amazing place to bring out a kind of energy and a kind of situation that's hard to find somewhere else. Next slide, please. And what I'd say is that it depends where in the cycle of startups that you are working. Because this is essentially how a startup grows. These are the stages of a startup. And the one important lesson that you as an entrepreneur realize that it matters where you help these companies and what part of the structure you want to work in. For example, Silicon Valley, people are saying it's not really a startup culture anymore. It's a growth and scaling culture because it's so expensive in Silicon Valley that you can't really run startups the way you used to. You can go there with something that you've proven that works and you can scale it, but you can't really start thousands of companies People don't have places to live even in Silicon Valley. So they need to have ideas and stuff coming in. How do you, there you go. So what is a startup? A startup is really an hypothesis. Some entrepreneur, someone is thinking, okay, we can do this thing in this way. And then you need to test that. It's really about testing this hypothesis. And I believe that Lithuania can be a place, a safe place for entrepreneurs to test their ideas. I mean, you are very protective of your beautiful country, your culture, and that's not a weakness. Someone was saying, even at this conference, that that's a weakness. It's not a weakness, it's a strength. I mean, if you want to see something really strong, you want to see the Lithuanian reaction if the Russians sort of start rumbling their weapons. You know, that's pure strength. And if you can play on that strength, it's incredibly strong. It's absolutely something. And I believe that this protective atmosphere, this beautiful, safe country that you've so carefully built up and that you fought for and you offered blood for, if you can somehow manifest that into an environment where companies and startups can be welcomed to be protected, the way you protect your own culture, the way you protect your own country. You know, startup founders like me, it's very difficult to start up a company. And you have a hypothesis that you want to test, and there's 1,000 reasons why companies fail, and it's usually not because you actually tested this hypothesis and you were able to figure out whether or not it was something that worked or not. There's, you know, you have internal conflicts, or you have red tape, as this image is showing. There's 1,000 reasons why things are failing. But if you can provide entrepreneurs, maybe outside Lithuania, to come here with a specific hypothesis and test that in a safe environment, you have something that you can build on. So the idea is that you can make this place, you can define these very specific hypotheses and these entrepreneurs, you can identify them, you can invite them one by one and nurture them, give them a protected environment. I love coming here to Lithuania for a number of reasons, and the safety and your beautiful attitude towards your own culture is one of them, actually. Because so many other places, like in London, as an entrepreneur, you are suffocated. The cost will bring you down, and the competition will bring you down. So you want a safe environment to test your hypothesis. Test more. Every committed attempt at doing something is extremely valuable. Everyone who actually shows up in Lithuania with a budget, like our company, Numbercom, we're doing a startup that's a messaging application that works on mobile phone numbers, the virtualized mobile phone numbers on the internet. We bring them online. And I come here with the team, and we bring in a budget to Lithuania, we hire people, and we do that. That's an attempt at testing an hypothesis. Can we move the mobile phone number to the web? And every such attempt is extremely valuable. So if you could start to invite founders, startups, to come to Lithuania and test their hypothesis specifically without needing to fight with everyone else. So you would sort of offer your hospitality as this protected environment. That's a strength to play on. That is potentially something very, very strong. Remember, no one else is offering that. Other people are inviting you to places, to London, to other places, to have you exposed to excruciating competition. That's not what you want. If you know the hypothesis you want to test, you want a safe environment to test that hypothesis. You don't want to be exposed to all kind of cutthroat competition. So it's potentially your greatest strength. So, you know, run more startups and allow them to flourish, to test their hypothesis in your beautiful country. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. Thank you very much. Your round of applause. And the next guest will present himself as well, Dr. Saul Richman. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Saul Reichman. It's the first time for me visiting Vilnius, Lithuania, And it's a pleasure being here and familiarizing myself with a Baltic state such as Lithuania. I come from Israel, and it's a pleasure to share my perspectives. Israel being a startup nation, and speaking after Hans, I can also disagree with him on some areas.
Right away.
And just because he was mentioning a few times hypothesis and testing your hypothesis, this is true, but for the audience, you have to remember that a startup is not just a small company or a small enterprise. A startup at the end of the day is a company that you can scale and grow very quickly. And at the end of the day, being a global world, and Lithuania is part of this global world, I believe that Lithuania and any country looking into innovation doesn't have the privilege of staying in a safe haven and testing itself, because at the end of the day, you are confronted with other players, with other competitors. So it's not just testing your hypothesis, but at the end of the day, realizing that you have to scale and grow very quickly. And if you're only doing it in the local market, then at the end of the day, you are not a true startup, or you're not aiming to be a startup. So just starting with that, let's start with my presentation. And I realize it's Friday, it's the end of the day, the weekend is almost starting, so let's do some Jeopardy. And you may not know this. So the highest density of startups in the world, one startup for every 2,000 people. Think where that is. More companies listed on NASDAQ than any other country outside the US, other than China. More venture capital per capita than any other country. That's right, but wait till the end. Highest ratio of engineers, PhDs per capita. And Nobel Prize winners, we've got 10 winners, 6 in science and 2 in economics. So one here in the audience said Israel, and I'm gonna really, it's the end of the day, so I'm gonna keep it short and sweet, hopefully. Just share with you some details. So on your left, you have the very dry information regarding Israel. But as you can see, compared to the size of Lithuania, Israel is smaller in size, around 4 times smaller than Lithuania. We've got some interesting things going on in Israel, not just the dry facts. After New York City and Japan, you've got so many sushi restaurants, you've got the lowest place on earth, so if you have the opportunity, it's quite easy to come and really witness what's taking place in such a small country. What I wanted to share with you is there are many things that are made in Israel, and you may not hear about them in the news. These are all companies that are stemming from Israel, and they are all in various sectors: cybersecurity, irrigation, food, homeland security, ICT, new media, transportation, renewable energies. So this is all tapping into, at the end of the day, brain power, and that is something that I feel that also Lithuanians, being very technical, have the ability to also try and excel in so many sectors. So if you look at Israel's GDP per capita and you compare it to the rest of the world, you see that it's quite high. And everybody's talking about GDP and how you raise that GDP. So at the end of the day, how do you raise your GDP? And of course, Lithuania is also looking to do that. So if you've got natural resources, that's a great way to benefit, such as Norway, for example. Hans is from Norway, and of course, the country is rich in that, and Norway's GDP is very high. Israel lacks in resources, I think to some degree also Lithuania. So at the end of the day, why do you look into innovation? Why is everybody talking about innovation? Because it's an excellent way to increase your GDP, to increase your workforce, to increase your productivity. And of course, that is why many countries are looking to innovation. That is why Israel today excels in its GDP, because it does innovation at the end of the day. So here are the ingredients for success, and I'm just going to post this really quickly on the slide here, and you can see that Israel has, people say, a very interesting ecosystem when it comes to why it excels in innovation. And if you look at each one of these segments, of course, they cannot be on their own. They are part of the ecosystem that makes it a platform for innovation. And afterwards, during our panel, I'll be able to also share with you my thoughts as to what I think Lithuania can benefit into how to tap better into innovation and creating a startup ecosystem. So without further ado, let's see a video, because I said let's keep it short, so it's going to be very visual, and hopefully you'll enjoy it.
Of startup activity in what has now become known as the startup nation. We're one of the newest countries on earth. We're also one of the oldest countries on earth. King David established his kingdom in Jerusalem a little over 3,000 years ago. So we have a very ancient history, but we're also very, very new in terms of the reestablishment of Israel in our historic land. And I think people are curious as to how this country, such a small country, 7.5 million people, has ended up playing such a huge role in entrepreneurship and in startup activity worldwide. Back in the early 90s, the Israeli government set up a fund called Yozma, which means initiative, whose goal was very simple, which is to create a venture capital industry in Israel. And the government said, look, we've got entrepreneurial energies which we need to unlock. We need a venture capital industry. So they put bait out there with $8 million matching grants and invited venture capital groupings and entrepreneurs from around the world to come match it 2-to-1, bring $16 million. The government would offer you $8 million. And they got a ton of people to set up funds. I think they initially set up 10 of these funds. But they had another couple of dozen who wanted to set up funds and said, oh, you know what? We're going to go ahead and do this anyway without the government match. And so the most important thing the government did, though, is get out. It was structured literally from day one as the government will help you get started and will then give us our money back so we can get out. There are special elements in the Israeli culture which are not present elsewhere, such as the role of our army. Our country, compulsory national service, is really the bedrock of national identity. The army takes the best and the brightest kids, puts them together in units, teaches them how to work as a team, how to be leaders. And so we have many kids who come out of the army and then start college and are really ready for entrepreneurial activities. Our best and our brightest kids are competing to get into the best units in the Army the way that kids here are competing to get to Harvard or Stanford. Right now, the amount of entrepreneurial activity in Israel is still astounding. We almost have as many startups as the whole continent of Europe. There are more Israeli companies traded on NASDAQ than any other country outside of the US. This has become a national sport, building companies. And there are many entrepreneurs now who are coming back for seconds and thirds and fourths, and that's really great. The ideas start often in our country. They scale elsewhere. I think that harbors very, very well for the future, because what we really have is this very, very unique role in terms of being what I call an incubator of innovation.
All right. So we just heard introductions from startups and consultants. Now it's time for Pirkko Konta, who is a CEO at Estonian Development Fund and who has strong connections with the government, actually, when it comes down to startups. Please introduce yourself.
Hello. My name is Pirkko, and I'm coming from Estonia. I will talk a little bit what is Startup Estonia program and how we see that Estonian startup ecosystem could be one of the best ecosystems in the world. Ecosystem, in my mind, is kind of like in gardening. What is a soil for startups where they could grow in the best way? I think Estonia is not the Silicon Valley. Certainly no. But what could be our advantage? We are a small country. So we believe that Estonia could be the most agile society in the world. And agile society is actually one thing what startups are needing. The society which is supporting creating of new ideas, developing of new ideas. So, but it's not only about ideas. Growing a business is not just having an idea. It is about execution. Because ideas, if they don't reach to the business, if they don't earn money, they die. This is Estonian mafia.
Finally.
Yeah. We got this name by some business angels from USA, who in Silicon Valley in one moment discovered that, huh, another Estonian startup, again, another Estonian startup. So in one moment, there was a hashtag in Twitter, Estonian Mafia. And of course, startups who are very good in marketing, they started to use it. If we talk about ecosystem, this is not a thing what government can build. We can only support. Estonian startup ecosystem is mainly created by startups and entrepreneurs. I think the biggest value of fast development has come from Skype because of the knowledge how to develop an idea, a working global product. Of course, it came a little bit a surprise, but I recall you that after 3 months of activity of Skype, Skype suddenly had 10 million users. 10 million after 3 months. But because of that, they got also venture capitalists. It was the first learning exercise for us to understand what is the road to grow an idea to a big multi-million business. And now, many of these companies, what we have here, have some connection to the Skype. Some IT guys have been working there, or some business developers. And they also form a club in Estonia, Estonian Startup Leaders Club. So it is a kind of mafia. But if we talk about an ecosystem, I once more want to point out that it's about culture and values. And there is a role of the government quite important. How to encourage right values, how to give the right education. If we talk about education, it's important that building a startup, it's consisting of very practical issues. In Israel, it is done, they get most of their kind of experience from the army, how to manage the process, how to make decisions quickly, how to build a team, how to have a team spirit. In Estonia, we need to do it in schools or some kind of alternative education. That's why I think it's very important to have hackathons, all kind of different events, but they have to be very practical. And the second thing, what I mentioned from the government side, government should be enabler. Like Tavi told you about e-residency last session here, the government enables Estonian businesses to make business with the help of e-residency. And we also believe that e-residency could be a very big advantage for developing our ecosystem, because startups are global. Some founders want to live in Philippines or Australia or in Israel. Some founders live in Tallinn. Some founders might live in Vilnius. There are more and more companies where people, like the company of size of 10, the people are living across the world and they are running a business virtually. So this kind of legislative enabling environment is really important, and government can help here. Roadmap, how to grow. This is the picture of different organizations and services, what we have in our ecosystem. And I think it is, you cannot make a one single organization who solves the whole problems, because you have to have different angles. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. Okay? And of course, technology is cool, but we have to keep in mind that technology is only one enabler. You have to think of the business model, how to build a business. And coming back, what I think, again, what is a really good value for Estonia is that we have very good connections to Silicon Valley. And nowadays, world, if you need some kind of help You don't need to travel all the time between Silicon Valley and Tallinn. But if I need an intro for a VC, there are many, many startups who can intro me, but also they know what I need to do before getting the interest from VCs. And this kind of experience, this is the thing what, again, you cannot learn from textbooks. So there one guy, one VC capitalist said quite recently in Estonia that one thing what you cannot accelerate is experience. So we believe that we need to import more experience. And what we want to do also is that startup ecosystem in Estonia, it is not just for Estonian startups. It is for all startups in the world, and we believe that we can help them to grow and provide a value for them as an agile society. That's all what I wanted to say.
Cool, Pirko, thank you so much. And last but not least is our good friend Wojtek Bertok, who is a serial entrepreneur, investor, mentor, and advisor to startups. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm not the guy you were expecting here. That guy went to Prague for some reason. Don't ask me why, ask him, he knows. My experience with, well, I'll start with actually disagreeing with something which was said, using the privilege of speaking last, right? Building an ecosystem means that one person's food is other person's waste, and that's how ecosystems work. Right. Meaning that there is a positive feedback loop, and what you are seeing, this going from ideation to the scaling and growth, is the idealization for just few of the startups. In order for them to succeed that way and get the global scale, there are many more which are failing in different stages of this process. And it would be really bad, except that there is learning from those failings. I disagree with what you, Hans, said before. The ecosystem which is not challenging is not something for startups. And I have two arguments why it is not. The first one is if you are not challenged sufficiently, or if you prefer not to be challenged, you don't have a right mindset to do a startup. Why? Just because that's not my words, somebody else said that. The startup founder would rather work 12 hours for himself than an hour for somebody else, right? You have to trust in your skills. You have to have your ambitions to start from nothing. That's one thing. The other thing about competition. I don't know how many of you came across something which was popular in the computer science like 30 years ago. It's called Metcalfe's law, and actually is applicable to any kind of network, including human networks, contact networks, beyond just the pure narrow meaning of the computer network we know. This essentially says that the strength of the network is proportional to the square of its nodes, of the number of its nodes. If you think about sharing in the startup environment, it's exactly this. The more people you bring to the table, just by the ability to build on the ideas of other people, you can get new ideas. And that's essential for starting again when you failed before. And that's also essential in being open for that sharing, which looks like the competition, like giving out your secrets to the competition. It is not. Just because ideas are relatively cheap, as you said, Pirko, execution is everything. Ideas for the good startup, getting into that scaling mode, are plenty. Ability to execute on them and verify the hypothesis early and fail fast so you can start something else is also crucial. So with that in mind, and I can give you the anecdotal evidence, when we were running the pitches for startups, preparing them, my partners at Google. I ran Google Engineering Office for quite some time in Poland, and we had the Google for Entrepreneurs presence there in Krakow. So we gathered some startups, we wanted to expose them to the big world of the US, and we organized the group pitches. And there were startups who were afraid of speaking in front of other startups, so the others don't steal their ideas. After listening to some, they came back and said, well, after all, we will want to talk to the full house, just because we are getting the feedback. Again, this feedback loop, which is crucial for the success. Just because there might be somebody else who have been making our mistakes in the past and learning them early, let us pivot and do something else pretty early. So fail fast, prove your hypothesis, or fail it. Failing is as good as proving it right. That's something which is crucial. And you know, you have to start building that ecosystem somewhere. If you have a garden, in order to have that cycle going, you have to have a pile of compost, which is essentially dead plants, right? So the new things arise from the previous attempts at similar ideas. New things arise from actually exposing your ideas to people with different set of experiences. That's very common in science. Again, one of my favorite arguments, a story of Google, the original page ranking algorithm by Larry Page. Actually, the thing which he used is known under different names in something like at least 10 or 12 areas of departments of science, under different names, but the very same thing, just the same equations, and he was the first one to apply that. The closest to what Google did was the application to the citation index of the scientists. And again, equation was the same, and that was his idea that doing this once, he can get the hold of the whole internet just because how technology grows exponentially. So having that in mind, I would encourage you to get together, to have the space for you to work on those ideas in the pre-founding stage. You know, the initial verification, initial testing of the hypothesis doesn't require money. Just think how you would build an experiment which verifies your hypothesis early. I know a lot of startups who didn't have a credit card initially. They didn't have money. They used co-working spaces. They used their work computers to come up with a very early set of ideas and rotate through them, verifying them. And only when they have something which worked, they could go to the next stage. Ask for the venture, for the seed capital, and go through the whole process of finding and verifying their ideas at larger and larger scale. So I see, talking to some of you, again, this is anecdotal, I would say that the startup scene here in Lithuania is something which we have in Poland a couple of years back. We started nurturing those startups. They started talking, and those days, there's an opportunity which you can use. Once you need that kind of support, it's not Krakow, regretfully, my hometown, it is Warsaw, and Google is opening campus, like in Tel Aviv, like in London, and this will provide all sets of programs which you can benefit from going through those early stages. So I invite you to participate in the activities of the Warsaw Google campus, being from some other company at that moment. It's not the only one opportunity. There's more and more venture capital coming to Eastern Europe. And frankly, I think it's just because of the solid basis in science and the teachings at the universities. Old school, it's very clearly seen if you compare the way of recruiting engineers to large companies, actually. We have advantage. We, meaning you and us and people further east and slightly further north, just because we still have those roots of the old solid educations in STEM subjects.
Cool.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much. Microphone to Hans, please. So
All
you
right.
guys just heard different presentations, different kinds of views from people from different countries who are doing absolutely different things, and they have different views about the perfect ecosystem, and you guys heard the summaries. But just really quickly, could every one of you right now quickly summarize in just a couple of sentences, what are the features of a highly successful developed startup ecosystem?
Well,
Just really briefly.
I'm going to use my privilege to have the microphone to just answer some of the kickback that I got. I got to do that.
Make it engaging and fiery.
The thing is that I'm not saying that, you know, you shouldn't be exposed to the international competition, because we have that online all the time, where it's a global market, right? So everyone is exposed to everything all the time.
Right.
We don't need to talk about sort of someone not being exposed to the global market, because that's what we all want to do and aim for. But I mean, you don't invite your competitors into your home, right? To your living room, to your bedroom, to
Absolutely.
your,
You're trying to go your own way.
You have a home, a private, protected space. And Vilnius and Lithuania cannot become more competitive than Tel Aviv or Silicon Valley in a couple of years. That just can't be done, because it's not the culture, it's not the history, it's not, you know, where you come from. So you got to play on different kinds of strengths. And what is your strength? Your strength is that you're very protective of this beautiful, wonderful culture and country, and you can extend that as a service. You can make that into a product. It can be the safe haven. It can be the home, the safe home for startups to go to. So that's what I meant about that. Okay.
Guys,
You raised.
let's make it.
I liked one analogy that was raised here, and that was compost. And if you want to play the game, you're going to have to get wet. And I really disagree on that comment that when you go to sleep, people go to sleep with LinkedIn on, you go to sleep with your Waze on, you go to sleep with Google apps, I mean, whatever you decide to go on to go to sleep with. So at the end of the day, even when you're at home, you're not in a safe haven. And if you want to play the game, you have to nurture that compost. And that compost means doing homework. And if the startup ecosystem, wherever you go today, if it's Berlin, Seoul, Singapore, Warsaw, there are some skills that you have to understand, that you have to obtain and do that homework. And we were speaking about agility, flexibility, being open thinkers, having a killer instinct, asking questions, admitting when you're wrong, always questioning yourself, because if you are an entrepreneur, you understand that you have to be ahead of your game, or you have to stick to what, you have to be very goal-oriented. All these are factors that I believe that if you want to be part of that ecosystem, or if you want to play the game, you understand that you have to sometimes get hurt, sometimes receive an answer that's not positive. These are factors that you have to play. As per what you are asking regarding how to be successful, I believe that you really have to create that ecosystem through looking at the value chain. And when you look at the value chain, you have to really distinguish the different key stakeholders. So you have to have, first of all, a very supportive organization, meaning mentors, incubators, accelerators.
Investors.
Exactly. Some research organizations, be it academia, universities, colleges, you have to look at funding organizations, and this can be, of course, through angels, VCs. If you look at the whole value chain up to private equity, if you look at, you have to have big companies, you have to engage with big companies. So we've got here in the background Microsoft and Google. You have to have these players to really understand better the global market. And of course, you have to eventually grow startups at different stages. So if you want to have that ecosystem, you have to look into, be it seed level up to, you know, round D, round C. So that's in a nutshell my
But I mean, the entire ecosystem exists virtually in cyberspace, on the net. So why do you need to sort of replicate everything that's already existed? You can get an e-citizenship from Estonia. You don't need to have that. You don't need to replicate everything here, because it's virtual. You can get it.
Wojtek?
Okay, let me try.
Highly
This
successful.
time agreeing with Hans. See?
Round of
Sorry,
applause.
Peter asked me not to get technical, but I can't resist my information theoretical framework. In the system which exhibits positive feedback loop, the bigger you are, the faster you grow. Meaning that if you try, and that's something very important what you said, maybe focusing on this shielding from the external world wasn't the thing, but the fact that you will have to find something which is unique to Lithuania if you want to start here is crucial. You can't succeed in trying to replicate Silicon Valley or Israeli ecosystem just because they are way too far on that road for you to be able to catch them. They are way too far, and that's why they are moving way too fast, like, galaxies, speeding up from each other forever.
Respond?
You cannot replicate, but I believe that if you look at those advanced startup ecosystems, you can definitely learn. And especially in Far East Asia, Asians that are considered very conservative, they do not accept failure. They realize that they don't have what it takes to grow those startup ecosystems.
Very true.
Yet they learn from experienced startup ecosystems. And I believe that, I agree, you cannot replicate one-on-one. These are different cultures, different geographies. But of course you can take some essences and you have to keep them in mind and definitely try to learn from others' experience. And that is something that I believe that you can do.
Pirko, could you please comment about the government support? Is it an additional source of basic need for startup ecosystem? Because when government is in play, it's good for investors because now you have the backing. At the same time, when government is in play, it's kind of more socialistic than capitalistic, and then maybe you can cripple those startups. What's your opinion on that?
I think if we
Closer.
we shouldn't look on government just as a source of resources. We should look on the government as an environment creator. Then, if the government decides to make e-residency,
Right.
this is giving an opportunity for businesses. Because if we talk about startups, it is very important to understand that what has changed during the last 15 years is that innovation is now open. 15 years ago, it was somewhere in big corporations, in dark rooms, five engineers.
R&D. Yeah.
R&D departments, lot of patents. Patents are history. Startups don't care about patents because they want to be faster. And if you start to apply and work with a patent, you are dead. So this open economy also means that you have to create the right environment for open. In Estonia, I think it is a big problem at the moment in Europe. We are thinking of refugees, and people are very protective. But the issue is that Estonian company called TransferWise, its CEO said that I have a problem in Tallinn. Somebody said to one guy with a dark skin that he is a Negro. And I need to hire the best talent. And that means what government can do is to create the right environment, also to guarantee that...
and to cultivate the talent
yes.
in the region.
Yes, it is about talent, it is about tolerance. Because if we talk about failing, government can support failing. In Estonia, what we did is that yesterday was first time in our history a National Entrepreneurship Day. And the day is now official flag day. We will set up the flags in Estonia to thank the people who are entrepreneurial. And entrepreneurs went to schools to tell their stories. Right. And I think these are the things, and coming back to kind of the government role is to enable, not to give the support, because actually for startups, government wants to check everything and they have maybe
too
papers or even if you have digital application, it's too complicated to support startups, because when the decision is made for one thing, startup needs already something another. So don't try to do subsidies for startups. It is dead end. It doesn't work. You can support craftsmen with subsidies, but not startups. You need to provide capital. Exactly what Israel did. They created a capital which is a dynamic, and they are able to make quick and hard decisions also when necessary. And I think this is one advantage what Israel did, that they made their capital market live. That means there was a capital who was ready to take risks, who was ready to be open. I think these kind of things what government can do, and we have to just help the startups run faster and be more dynamic.
Right. Yesterday we had a discussion at that VIP party, which served a bunch of good food actually, about innovation and disruption in particular. and we were talking about how innovative startups are really just fighting their way through to replace the big national, multinational corporations. So the question for you guys is, how innovative thinking can change the world and enable digitalization? Hence?
Well, you know, forget about the government. You know, the real strength in an ecosystem is not the government. The government is just there as a result of the people, and you need something to organize. The real strength of an ecosystem is culture, ideas, people, strength, what you're really about. So the ones that can help you discover what you're strong at are poets, artists, singers, literature. You know, that business people like us cannot tell you what you're strong at. That's ingrained in your spine, and there are artists that can tell you that.
Because those are the most innovative people in the region, basically. Those are the people who think differently all the time.
Right. So you got to find that somehow and apply that in a business, startup, ecosystem sense. That's what it's all about.
So we're going for artistic people.
Yeah, we bring in some poets and some artists, some people with, you know, guitars, and they can tell us what the strengths in the local ecosystem are, and then build upon that.
But can you still be innovative while keeping standard business models that worked in the past without trying to recreate something new?
I will just comment on that. When it comes to Israel, people don't fully understand what happened during the 80s, 90s. There was a flux of post-USSR immigrants to Israel. The government realized that many people coming from different craftsmanship, different disciplines of education needed job securities, because coming from the USSR, people wanted, first of all, to come and to have a job. So the Office of Chief Scientist created an incubator program and realized that even though Israel may not excel in renewable energies, there are some scientists from the USSR that did some work on coal. Let's create an ecosystem for them. So the government took initiatives in 25 different locations around Israel, and Israel is very small, to create that ecosystem for them to do their stuff. I believe that, you know, government has a role, not on the micro level, but on the macro level. Of course, funding fundamental research. That is something that one day will enable potentially startups to grow from that fundamental research. So government has a role, not just as an enabler, removing obstacles, deregulation, all this needs to take place, but an active role also really to create that support ecosystem. And this does, to this day, even though Israel is a startup nation, continue with an enormous funding from the government. So I think that government have a role to play on the macro level of